We're going to go on to our next speaker now. If we can bring up the slides, that will be Alan Whittington.
Hello.
And yeah, everyone else should mute themselves, and you can start when you're ready.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about the energetics of melting and sintering lunar regolith simulants. And the first part of the title is lower cost lunar bricks. So next slide, please. What this talk is specifically aimed at is trying to make construction materials on the moon. So of course, we know that lunar construction will require in situ resource utilization, ISRU, because it costs too much money to take stuff up there. And when we get to the moon, we're presumably going to have to use whatever we find where we land. And now, depending on where that is, we may have the lunar mare, shown in red on the geologic map, the dark stuff on the L-Rock mosaic. We could have feldspathic highlands material, the bright reflective material, showing kind of beige and brown on the geologic map. But as well as these compositional end members, and of course, in any particular place, we're probably going to find something that is a mixture of the two. But we also have a spectrum from crystalline to amorphous or glassy material, right? We have pyroclastic material from volcanoes on the moon. We have impact melt sheets. We have the agglutinates produced by impact gardening, and so on. So next slide, please. What we decided to do was to try to figure out how much energy is required to actually make bricks from different materials. So we used an orthosite from Stillwater, Montana as our highlands analog. We used JSC1A, which is actually a basalt from Arizona, as our lunar mare analog. And we also mixed them together, did a 50-50 mixture. We also took both the original powdered material. So for the anorthosite, we actually got a rock and then we powdered it in the lab, and that's all crystalline. JSC1 actually is about 50% glass to begin with. But in both cases, we completely remelted it in a high temperature muffle furnace, poured it out on a plate, quenched the glass, smashed it, powdered it. So we had our initial powder, and then we also had a glass powder. So we did 10 different combinations, different compositions, and different crystallinities. Next slide, please. And what we did was we measured the heat capacity using differential scanning calorimetry. So you'll see several graphs that look like this. So I just need to spend a minute to explain what these graphs mean. The x-axis, of course, is temperature, so that's easy, but the y-axis is apparent heat capacity. So this is basically what the calorimeter thinks the heat capacity of the material is. Now, the actual heat capacity of these materials is about 1 joule per gram per Kelvin over a wide range of composition and temperature. The heat capacity increases at higher temperature, and it's higher for liquids than it is for crystals, for example. But the additional stuff you see on this graph, we have a trough labeled crystallization and a peak labeled melting. These are enthalpies of phase changes, right? So an enthalpy change is the integral of Cp dt, i.e. the area under the curve. Or in this case, for crystallization, it's the area above the curve. But anyway, so the example shown here is JSC, just straight out of the bucket, JSC powder. It's a mixture of crystals and glass to begin with. The heat capacity is around 0.8 joule per gram per Kelvin. We heat it up. The glassy part goes through a glass transition at about 650 degrees C, above which that part is now liquid, but it's also well below its melting point. So quite sensibly, it crystallizes. And that's what leads to that crystallization trough right there, which is exothermic. And so it appears that the heat capacity goes down because the material itself is releasing a bunch of energy that we didn't need to put into the calorimeter to heat it up. Okay, at some point we end up basically fully crystalline at around 1,050 degrees C. And then as we go above that, we start to melt. And that's endothermic, and we've got the peak there. But melting is only complete by when we reach the liquidus temperature shown at the right there at about 1,400 degrees C. Okay, so that's what's happening on these graphs. The other thing, the darker shaded area there, is the enthalpy required to heat this material from 50 degrees to 1,000 degrees. Now, what will happen with something that was initially glassy like JSC is that the glassy part is actually going to crystallize, as we mentioned. But now we have something that can perhaps stick together. So this is basically sintering. And one thing we're going to look at is, can we make a brick by sintering glassy material rather than heating everything up all the way to the liquidus temperature, much higher temperature, and then cooling and crystallizing? Because that takes a lot of energy. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically, we can see here anorthosite on the left, JSC1A on the right. The glassy materials have these big crystallization troughs where they release around 250 joule per gram, maybe higher, once they get above the glass transition. The key thing we noticed overall is that the total enthalpy required for complete melting, going up to the liquidus, is still lower for glacier starting materials. Next slide, please. We also noticed that basalt sinters and melts at lower temperatures than the anorthosite. So the mare are going to be easier, or at least work at lower temperatures than the highlands. So on the left, we see the powders, red as JSC, blue as anorthosite, black as a mixture of the two. And JSC is completely molten before 1400 C, and the anorthosite does not melt until well above 1500, actually slightly higher than our calorimeter can go. And on the right, you'll see actually the same is true even if we start with glassy starting material. So the glass transition temperature is lower for the basalt, and again, it's fully molten at a lower temperature than the highlands material. Next slide, please. Okay, this is actually just a series of mixtures of the two, and basically I'll just say that we get a range of behavior that is interesting, and we wrote a paper on it, which is still in review. Hopefully will come out in New Space in a few months. Next slide, please. If you're interested in the details, please email me or look at that when it comes out. This is kind of a summary of our results. So here we have the total enthalpy change required to heat the material from 50 degrees up to either its liquidus temperature, right, for these upper data, and the liquidus temperature there varies depending on what the actual composition of the material is. But we're looking at anywhere between about 1600 and 2000 joules per gram. Whereas to sinter at just over 1000 degrees, we're looking at about half that, somewhere between 700 and 1100 joules per gram. And again, in both cases, the glassier the material on the right, the less total energy is required. Next slide, please. So this interesting thing, which is, as we know, the smaller size fractions in the lunar regolith are generally glacier, which means that we can concentrate amorphous material simply by physical sorting, so sieving or something else. But if we can get lots and lots of the fine material, it's going to be glacier. Next slide, please. And that means it's going to take less energy to do things with it, whether that be sintering or complete melting. So if you're interested in this, I also encourage you to see the poster by my postdoc, Anis Parsapur, which is on other simulant materials. And our key conclusions here are, first of all, that bricks can be produced at a relatively low energy cost by sintering, as long as the starting material has about 50% glass or more. That glass could be sourced from volcanic or impact melt deposits, or could simply be achieved by physical sorting, like just sieving and separating out the finer size fraction. The other caveat here is that we've just studied the thermal properties and the energy required. We have not actually made bricks through the sintering process, so I make no guarantees that it's actually going to produce useful construction materials yet, but it certainly saves on energy costs. So if it does work, that'd be great. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks very much.